Welcome to this week's Iraq briefing, where we discuss the top events shaping Iraq today. And wow, we have a lot to talk about. I'm Eric Gustafson, EPIC's Executive Director.
And I'm Omar Nidawi.
And as you can see, I'm back in Washington, D.C. This is now where I will be based going forward. So I'm looking forward to catching up with a lot of folks. So let's get into today's topic. No big surprise, we talk about Iraq being the land between two rivers, and often, historically, Iraq has also been the land between two belligerent powers, and that's what we're seeing right now. So today's topic is, how's Israel's airstrikes on Iran impacting Iraq? So let's get right into it. Can you tell us what just happened over the night?
Well, things escalated quickly. We woke up yesterday morning to an announcement from the U.S. State Department saying that they're pulling out some of the non-essential personnel out of the Iraq embassy in Baghdad and some of the other regional embassies, Kuwait, Bahrain. But people saw that as probably just a sign of U.S. pressure on Iran ahead of nuclear talks, that the U.S. is gearing up for potential conflict if things go wrong. But within several hours, we started seeing reports coming in from Tehran and elsewhere in Iran that Israeli airstrikes are happening. So there were multiple waves of airstrikes that traversed Iraqi airspace and struck multiple facilities across Iran, nuclear facilities, military sites, ballistic missile sites, production sites, as well as military commanders, senior military commanders, and some nuclear scientists. So some of Iran's most senior military commanders, including the chief of the IRGC, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, was killed. The chief of staff of the military, and again, Iraq is kind of stuck in the middle. All of the Israeli warplanes crossed Iraqi airspace. Some missiles made landfall in Iraq, and no casualties though. And Iran's initial signs of retaliation, some 150 drones that were fired, were also used. They also used Iraq's airspace on their way to Israel, but I don't think that any of them actually made it to their targets. So this situation is quite tense, and in Iraq with a lot of anticipation about what this means, where this is going. Clearly, any additional hostilities are going to happen across Iraq, and that creates a lot of uneasiness there.
Wow. And as I understand that nuclear talks were actually scheduled for this coming Sunday. Has there been any word? Are those talks still on? I mean, it seems like it would be strange for the talks to proceed at this point after these attacks on Iran.
It's definitely awkward. I mean, Donald Trump is encouraging Iran or urging Iran to continue with the talks and make a deal, because that's the only way out, and that's how he's framing it. It's going to be very difficult, I think, for the Iranian leadership to go and talk in the middle of being attacked by Israel. I don't think that works. There needs to be some period of cooling off before I think talks could resume, if they ever do.
Yeah. No, I mean, it's interesting because oftentimes there's this one-sided conversation about Israel's right to defend itself and being able to preserve its deterrence power. But that applies for every country. Every country wants to be able to defend itself and have deterrence
Every
power.
country wants to defend itself, has a legitimate right to defend itself. Yeah. But that doesn't always mean that aggression or that the use of force is the best path towards lasting peace. Sometimes jumping the gun, even if it means winning some tactical wins, can actually be detrimental to the end result of peace. Yeah. Because everyone is fighting for peace on their own terms, but sometimes you win the actual military conflict, but you undermine the possibility of that peace.
So let's now shift to the reaction within Iraq and also some of the details that are now unfolding about how Israel's attack was carried out. It wasn't just flyover warplanes, and flying drones from Israel, but as I understand, there were even pre-positioned drones attacking from within Iran. So how are Iraqi officials reacting to this?
Yeah, there haven't been a lot of official reactions to this, except from Kata'ib Hezbollah, which is a close ally of the Iranian Islamic Revolutionary Guard. It's one of the most powerful Iranian proxies in Iraq, and they are, right off the bat, they're accusing the Kurdistan Regional Government of facilitating the work of the Mossad in penetrating into Iran and in planting those, small explosive suicide drones that were used in some of the attacks. This is very similar to, in theory, to what the Ukrainians did against the Russian Air Force a couple of weeks ago. And it's a new, really a novelty in warfare that we're seeing for the first time. I'm sure it's raising a lot of big alarm bells among Iran's allies inside Iraq, because now, knowing how porous Iraq's security environment is to infiltration by individuals, by intelligence agents, people who have a target on their back are going to be looking over the shoulder more often than they already do.
Yeah, this is definitely something we're seeing, the increased use of drones in warfare. With the war between Russia and Ukraine, I've heard reports that up to 70% of all military casualties now are from drones.
I believe that. I can believe that.
Yeah. So tell me a little bit more about like how, for example, are there hasn't been that much of an official response from Iraq, but other than Kataib Hezbollah, has anybody else, any other leaders in Iraq spoken?
Things are trickling in, but again, I think a lot of people are still trying to absorb and process what happened. So Iraq's foreign ministry is filing a complaint to the UN Security Council about Israel's violation of Iraqi airspace during the operations. That's the only official response that I've seen, from the Iraqi government. Prime Minister hasn't said anything as far as I've seen until before we just started recording. But other Iraqi politicians have started chiming in and condemning, of course, Israel's attack on Iran. The Iraqi militia space is a little bit divided. So obviously Iran's closest allies, Asab al-Haq, Kataib Hezbollah, Kataib Sayyid al-Shuhada, they're strongly condemning the Israeli attacks, but also insisting that this is not going to go unpunished, and that members of the Islamic resistance in Iraq, as they call it, that's the umbrella group that encompasses all the Iranian allies that have been attacking U.S. and Israeli interests, that they should gear up and be ready for retaliation, and that retaliation is going to be severe. On the other hand, you have people like Muqtada al-Sadr, who's also a militia leader himself, but he adopted a position that seeks to distance himself from Iran, and he actually is saying people should keep Iraq out of this, that no one should do anything stupid that could drag Iraq into this conflict. This is not our conflict. We condemn Israel's attacks. This is an unprovoked aggression, but Iraq needs to stay out of this, and you fools stay out of this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So in a sense, an Iraq first position.
Exactly.
You can say.
Yeah.
So what do you think is going to happen next now?
Well, I think in a way the ball is in Iran's court. Of course, Israel still has a lot to say. We've seen multiple waves of airstrikes against Iran. More could be coming. There are indications that this could be a weeks-long operation. Iran is in a tough spot because it now, I think it's realizing that its usual methods of retaliation are not paying off. Drones and ballistic missiles are not reaching their targets. They're not making an impact. The loss of Hezbollah and Hamas has made a dent in its ability to project power from close to Israel's borders. The idea of using its Iraqi proxies is also of unproven potential and is not likely to lead to much. So I think Iran has a little bit of strategic calculation to do and to think about what its real options are. Is it going to basically capitulate and accept its reduced ability to deal with Israel on a military basis? And it brings back to mind the 1988 ceasefire between Iraq and Iran at the end of the Iran-Iraq War, when Khomeini, the leader of the Islamic Revolution, famously said that he was drinking the the poison chalice when he accepted the ceasefire. So there is a record, there is history of Iranian leadership accepting that a military situation is unwinnable. But that was, again, the leader of the Islamic Revolution. Can Ali Khamenei do something like that and expect to survive politically? That's going to be quite more challenging for him, I think, than it was for his predecessor in 1988. So we'll see. I think Iran doesn't have a lot of good options. There is, unfortunately, some unconventional methods or asymmetric methods of warfare. Iran could try to go back to the use of international terrorism and maybe like target, of course, U.S. interests or Israeli interests, embassies in Arab countries. That's probably going to only lead to a further escalation in the conflict. I think, generally speaking, from Iraq's perspective, there are hopes that this is not going to lead to an emphasis on using and beefing up the capabilities of Iraqi militias that are loyal to Iran as a force in this conflict, because that would definitely not be in Iraq's interest and could lead to a lot of damage inside Iraq.
Yeah, I mean, it makes me return to the comment you said about Muqtada Sadr saying, Iraq should stay out of this. It's not our conflict. Yeah. It's that these militias have kind of often been a liability for Iraq.
Right.
Yeah. And so it underscores that once more. Well, the last quick thing is you talked about unconventional means and the use of Iraqi militias. Are U.S. forces at risk? And to what extent are U.S. forces at risk?
Well, certainly there is a level of risk, of course. I mean, we've seen in the past, whenever there is escalation involving Iran, there would be some form of retaliation that targets U.S. forces in Iraqi bases. We've seen that in Harir near Erbil. We've seen that in Ain al-Asad and Anbar. I wonder right now if the calculations are going to be a little different, especially for Baghdad. And Baghdad is going to try to put, to try to dissuade Iran and the militias from doing something like that, because the element that changed here is the fall of Bashar al-Assad in Syria and the weak state of Syria's military forces and its ability to confront ISIS. In recent months, that has, I think, prompted Baghdad to try and talk to the U.S. about reconsidering the idea of withdrawing from Iraq, of withdrawing its forces from Iraq, because Iraq feels a little bit more vulnerable to possible ISIS resurgence when this new Syrian government and its security forces are still weak. They still haven't been able to exert full control over their territory. And for Iraq, ISIS is a mortal enemy and a mortal threat. So I think there's going to be perhaps more careful thinking about whether a strike against U.S. bases in Iraq can, about how that could actually damage Iraq's interests, not just in terms of upsetting diplomatic relations with the U.S., but in terms of the U.S. saying, you don't want me here, and you already said we're leaving, so we might as well leave, and good luck fighting ISIS. Yeah. That's not something that Baghdad wants to deal with.
Yeah, and that would have serious repercussions. Yeah. So, well, thank you so much, Omar. This has been your Iraq briefing. You can follow us at enablingpeace.org. Of course, a lot of these conversations, we're going to be continuing to follow what's happening in Iraq, and you can catch us every single week with our weekly Iraq Security and Humanitarian Monitor, ISHM. So take a look at that. I also want to give a quick shout out for our current campaign. We are raising $20,000 in 20 days to support a Summer of Hope for 25 or more orphaned girls in the city of Sulaymaniyah. So take a look. We have a spot fund campaign. We'll include a link down below. But please donate and share it with your friends and family. We really want to reach that goal. Other than that, ma salama.
Ma salama.